All right, so last time we talked about solving equations with addition and subtraction. This time it's solving equations with multiplication and division. Now, what did we mean when we said we solve an equation? What are we actually doing? Yeah, finding the variable, or finding what the variable equals, right? And we did that with addition and subtraction, what you just did on the last quiz, okay? So we get the variable on one side of the equation by itself, okay? We always have to do the same thing to both sides of the equal sign. And to undo some operation, we use the opposite operation, or the inverse operation. So to undo addition, we use subtraction. To undo subtraction, we use addition. Same thing for multiplication and division. To undo multiplication, we use division. To undo division, we multiply, right? So, for example, here I have 8 times x equals 32, right? So I'm multiplying the variable by 8. What's the opposite of multiplying the variable by 8? Dividing by 8, right? So what you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other. 8 divided by 8 just leaves me with 1x. 32 divided by 8 is 4. The answer is 4, right? I could check my answer. I plug that back in for x. 8 times 4 is 32, so that's correct, right? So I just look at what's happening to the variable and I undo it. Yeah? Question?
So are we just doing
So, for example, we won't go over all these because they're all the same, but if I look at that first one, I'm multiplying the variable by x, so I need to do the opposite of multiplying by 5. So I need to do the opposite. I need to divide both sides by 5. So x is 4. Doesn't matter if the variable's on the right side, it's the same thing. You would divide both sides by 8, so that and you would get t is 3, and so on. Okay? Here you would divide by 3, here you divide by 4. All right? You're multiplying the variable by something. To undo that, you divide. Okay? To solve a division equation, we multiply on the same number on both sides of the equal sign. So for example, here I have x divided by 3. The opposite of dividing by 3 is multiplying by 3. Multiply this side by 3. Those are opposites, so they cancel. Multiply this side by 3. 25 times 3, x is 75. Yes, question?
You can have, you just, like on the last page, it said 3, no, it said 4.
Very good question. The question was on this fourth one, right? I would divide both sides by 4 to undo that multiplication by 4. So I'm just left with k here, and I have 18 divided by 4 here. Okay. You can simplify that fraction, right? They're both divisible by 2, the top and bottom number. So that's the same thing as 9 over 2, right? If I divide top and bottom number by 2. And then I could make it an improper, it's improper fraction right now. I could make it a mixed number if I want. I'm okay with improper fractions right now. 2 goes into 9 4 times with 1 left over, so it'd be like 4.5. Yeah, you just simplify that fraction. Right, good question. Okay. And like I said here, we multiply both sides by 3, and we would get 75. Okay. So in this case, what would I do to both sides of the equal sign here to get x alone? Yeah, I look what's happening to the variable. I'm multiplying by -3. So the opposite of multiplying by -3 is dividing by -3. Okay. So I'm just left with x here. If I have a positive number divided by a negative number, is it going to be negative or positive? Negative, right, because you have to have 2 negatives to make it be positive, so that would be -7. In this case, what am I going to do to both sides of the equal sign? Times by -2, right, good, because I'm dividing by -2, so I need to multiply both sides by -2. Those cancel. M equals positive times a negative is a negative, so -16. Okay. So we just need to look what's happening to the variable and undo that. Okay. Same thing here. What would I do to both sides? Times by 3, times by 5. Okay. Do that to both sides. Now, how about when there's a fraction in front here?
Times 3.
Yes, we'll get to that in just a second. You're right. There's a fraction in front. That means I'm taking 2/3 times x, right? 2/3 times x. So the long way would be to say, okay, I need to divide both sides by 2/3. So I do that, and I get x equals 6, and I'll write it like this, divided by 2/3. Well, when you're dividing a fraction, that's the same thing as multiplying by what? Right. Remember when you divide a fraction, you have to flip the second one and change it to a multiplication problem? Okay. And then I wrote 6 over 1. And then I just multiply straight across. 6 times 3 is 18. 1 times 2 is 2. 18 divided by 2 is 9. That's the long way of doing it, right? I wrote to divide by 2/3, flip the second one, change it to a multiplication problem, and so on. That's a perfectly good way to do it. Another way you can do it, though, is when you have a fraction out front, if you multiply by the reciprocal just to start with, reciprocal means flipping the fraction, right? If I just multiply this side by 3 over 2 and multiply this side by 3 over 2, well, those 3's divide out, those 2's divide out, I'm just left with 6. I can put 6 over 1, so I can multiply these fractions. 6 times 3 is 18. 1 times 2 is 2. 18 divided by 2 is 9. Question, yes?
Could you do 6 times 3 divided by 3?
Just say it again.
Could you do like 6 divided, or 6 times 3?
Yes, go ahead and multiply those straight across and then just divide it by 2. You can do that all at once in step if you want. You don't have to write this step if you can simplify from there. Okay? So whenever you have a fraction out front, if you multiply by the reciprocal and multiply by it flipped, okay, you can get rid of that fraction and then just simplify the other side. Okay? So, for example, here, what would I do to both sides of this equal sign to get y by itself? Yeah, multiply by the reciprocal, the flipped fraction. Multiply by 7 over 2. That's a 7. Okay? Then I have to do the same thing to this side. Those divide out. I'm left with y. 10 times 7, 70. 1 times 2, 2. 70 divided by 2, 35. Again, if you're ever unsure, punch it in your calculator. 2 7 times 35, you should get 10. Okay?
All you do is flip the reciprocal or add.
You multiply by the reciprocal, right? Multiply by the reciprocal when you have a fraction out front.
7 times 10 and 2 times?
Right, I multiplied straight across. 7 times 10, 1 times 2. I got 70 over 2. Yep.
Okay.
Remember when you multiply fractions, you just multiply the numerators together, multiply the denominators. Okay. The variable's on the right this time, but nothing changes. I still have 1/4 times y. So if I multiply by the reciprocal, okay, if I multiply this side by 4 over 1, do the same thing on this side. Those 4's divide out, those 1's divide out. I'm left with y. I'll just write that over 1 and multiply straight across. 6 times 4, 24. 1 times 1 is 1. Well, 24 divided by 1 is 24. Okay. Fraction in front, multiply by the reciprocal. Any questions on that part? No? Okay. So that's it for multiplying and dividing to solve equations.